Okay, welcome back. We're on page 490 or so, talking about, the guard force. If you contract out a guard force, particularly if it's 24/7, maybe you have a guard shack out front. Maybe they walk the perimeter. Maybe they're on the inside of the building. There's lots of choices. But, boredom and distraction, yeah, that is a key thing. Guard dogs have, keener senses of hearing, that kind of stuff. So, whatever. ID cards and badges, that'd be a good thing to have. Everyone has something visible on the outside of their clothing. Okay. We don't need no stinking badges. Okay, yet another movie reference. The Treasures of the Sierra Madre. This is the attributed to that first thing about badges. Anyway, so we don't need no stinking badges. Okay, but the idea is an ID card is something you basically have like in your wallet, and a badge is something you wear on the outside. Okay, ID card is carried but typically concealed, and then the badge is worn and visible. Smart cards, bag strip or chip. Like when I go to the university and I want to unlock the security lab, I pull out my ID card, hold it up to the little reader. It goes, and the door unlocks so we can get in. So the issue of tailgating, you ought to have it so that, if you're going through like a security turnstile, only one person can go through at a time. You can't bunch them up and have them all go through at the same time. We already talked about, kind of. A man trap is basically that. One person can go through at a time. The idea is that, consider a hallway. You have a door at this end, a door at this end. You let one person through, and they can't open this door or leave. Once they get in, they're locked. And so there's an intercom or perhaps a glass wall, where the security says, "May I help you, sir?" And, you show him the credentials, and he, buzzes them through. But while they're there, they cannot leave. They cannot go forward, and they cannot go back. They're stuck. So if they say, "I'm sorry, sir, we're going to have someone escort you out the building," and they have to wait, for someone to come grab them. Anyway, kind of a cool story. Locks and keys. Very few people are using mechanical locks these days. I still have a mechanical lock at the house, but everything else. The electromechanical ones, those are the ones, with like you can go to the hotel and you hold the key up, and right, that kind of stuff. No big deal. Could be a mag strip. That's kind of old these days. A chip, RFID, most likely. A pin pad. And you should have a system that can log all this stuff. Like at the hotel, they have a very simple thing. It's not at all complicated, but it basically records every single time you activate the thing. And we've already covered biometrics in Chapter 8, so I'm not going to do that again. So we're talking about the computer room and access to the computer room and wiring closets, for example. Obviously, that ought to be locked, right? Prevent physical access. Because, man, if they have physical access to the server or to the wiring closet, they could tap in the lines, plug into a monitoring port, do all sorts of crazy things. And if they have physical access to a server, they can put in their own boot media and reboot the server. And then, basically, I use a cool little disk called Kali. You boot a machine up into this thing, and it doesn't even look at permissions. It basically grants you all the information you need as if there were no permissions on files at all. So, wow. Having physical access, ooh, boy. Okay, so fire safety. Obviously I want to prevent a fire more than doing anything else, right? That kind of makes sense. But I needed to be able to detect the fire and perhaps do a response. So, there's a response. You know how to say, for a fire to happen, it has to have heat, oxygen, and fuel. So you can either take out the heat, take out the fuel, or take out the oxygen, right? Now, it's not really practical to take out the fuel because the fuel is the server racks and the wires, and some of those things are flammable. Okay. So we're going to talk about that in a little great detail in just a moment. And then failure of supporting systems. Let's say, for example, you have this great server set up, and somebody outside the building, maybe 5 miles away, dug into the water main, and poof, you don't have any water to your facility. Well, more likely, the boiler for the hot water and heating system and the air conditioning system all use water. And so if you don't have water, your air conditioning system is probably going to shut down and you're going to have to shut down. So don't think of water as domestic water, like I'm washing my hands or I'm doing laundry. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about industrial use of water for a cooling tower, for a great air conditioning system. Okay. HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So I need to track things like humidity and temperature, those kinds of things. 100-degree temperature can cause damage to an awful lot of systems. So we're not talking about room temperature. We're talking about temperature like on the die, on the CPU chip, And so maybe I have to have like a fan that, system for, some sort of cooling for every single rack. Maybe I have a filter for every single rack. The static electricity, for humidity to be, for static electricity to be diminished, there's a range of humidity levels that have to be maintained. And then ventilation shafts. Now, I will tell you, James Bond and a bunch of other cool spy films always show these guys crawling through the ductwork, right? And I really love this thing from Mythbusters where they actually did that. Can you scale through a duct, and bottom line is, yes, you can kind of sort of make it through a duct, but for God's sake, everyone would hear you for miles around. It's filthy. It's noisy as hell. So no, you cannot use that. But could I send a little robot down a duct? Something small, a little drone to run through and maybe just park outside and listen, or maybe have a little video camera that pointed. Yeah, so maybe you ought to have some little bars in there. I know it's kind of crazy, but you can, the engineering people know what we're talking about when you go in and you say you want security bars in a ventilation duct. So power management and conditioning, page 495. The first layer of defense is the utility company. The second is an uninterrupted power supply. And then the third, of course, is the generators themselves. You need them all. You can't do it without it. Okay, so I'm continuing on page 496, the interception of data. So there could be some other things involved here. Direct observation. You could have a window in the wall or in the door. Somebody doing shoulder surfing. They're just walking around. Look over. They're walking down the hall in a cube farm, and they're looking over, seeing what people are doing. That kind of stuff, right? Or I could do something more insidious. I can hide a GoPro camera up in the ceiling above the keyboard where the server is, and then go retrieve it later and watch someone log in. So direct observation. Interception, like I plug in a USB keylogger, a little dongle thing. You go to the back of the machine, you unplug the keyboard, plug this guy in, plug the keyboard back in. That kind of stuff. Using Wireshark to download packets. I'll admit fiber optic cables are a little bit more secure from tapping, but there are tapping tools for fiber optics. And then electromagnetic. The Army went through this system called Tempest. And their idea was that, keyboards and mice and computers all emit electromagnetic radiation, EMR. And if you had sensitive enough equipment, you could probably listen in on the conversation. They could actually tell what keys were being pressed from 5 feet away if they had a noisy keyboard. Noisy meaning electronically noisy. So yeah, can they listen in? Yeah. So what about there was even a period of time, not so much now with flat panel, but you could see what was being displayed on the screen, particularly the text, not graphical, but text that were up on the screen. Yeah, you could read all that. Securing mobile and portable systems. Okay, so laptops, tablets, phones, sometimes they contain sensitive information, right? So lost or stolen. I don't remember exactly the context, but I saw this thing, some news report, where they showed the New York Transit Authority lost and found, and there was just shelving with rows and rows and rows of laptops that got left in the back of a cab or got left on a train. or got left at the airport. I mean, apparently it's so incredibly obvious that they had hundreds of these things. Yeah. So, lost or stolen, right? Could be a problem. Maybe you have stored usernames and passwords and credentials, all that stuff. If you're in a business, you might have, the LoJack system where you could have remote wiping of a system once it comes back online. Maybe you're doing that whole disk encryption thing. Now, that's designed is I can't pull the storage media out of the laptop and go plug it in some other system and read it and then put it back. Can't do that. So suggestions, talk about, keep your laptops kind of simple, nondescript carrying case with no distinctive marketing. For example, let's say you're very proud of your brand new, Acer laptop and, you have Republic of Gamers on there. And so you get a Republic of Gamers backpack or, satchel or something. Well, people immediately can look at that and go, aha, that's a high-end laptop. I think I'll steal that one. Well, just don't do that. Make it nondescript, okay? Don't ever have like the labeling stuff in plain sight. And so let's talk about remote work. So remote commuting security, a work from home kind of thing. So how secure is your home stuff? I mean, if I'm going to allow you to work from home, don't I want to know, do you have a virus set up in your home? I'd like to know that. And what about, are we going to be doing a VPN connection? And if so, is it going to be one of the corporate ones? Right? Hopefully. In our case, we use Duo and the authenticator thing for two-factor authentication, and that works great in a remote environment. Plus, if I'm there at the office, it's the exact same thing. Certainly a lot better than having to purchase some, card readers for everyone at home, right? Duo and authenticator, I assume that they're either free or dirt cheap. Okay, special considerations for physical security. The decision to contract out the guard force. Now, to tell you the truth, if you're going to have real guards that carry guns, they're going to need to be licensed somehow. Maybe they even have to have, a proficiency test for the firing the weapon, that kind of stuff, right? I don't want to do background checks. I don't want to do firearms training. I don't want to do firearms testing or licensing. I don't want to do any of that. I'd much rather contract that out and make the company responsible for it. Okay, let's talk about, social engineering. Pose as a customer, or a custodian. I've seen stories about, somebody shows up with a ladder and some fluorescent bulbs, and they walk up and say, hey, I need to change the lighting in the server room. Could you let me in? And they go right on through. If you had a visitor log, you could at least find out who let them in. At least you could find that out. Anyway, those kind of stories are kind of crazy, but they're very real and they're very effective. I mean, look, I'll admit, if I look like a maintenance guy and I'm wearing a tool belt and I've got over my shoulder, I have a ladder and I've got a box of fluorescent bulbs, I would imagine that, I don't know, I'm making this up, probably 60 to 70% of the people would say, sure, right this way, I'll punch you in, and then turn around and leave. And I'm alone in the server room and I can install a GoPro camera or a keyboard locker or reboot the machine. I could do anything I want. Okay, we've reached the end of this chapter. Some of this we're going to go over in a little bit more detail in the upcoming video. So I'll see you there.